Hello and welcome here. Okay, for those of you just entering in, I'm going to invite you to just take a moment to become more present in this space. I'm glad you're here. Glad you made your way here. And as you take a moment to just be more still, just notice as you inhale how your body gets ready to soften. And as you exhale, make it longer than your inhale. Just notice what happens in your body. If it helps you to close your eyes while you're doing that, do so if it's safe for you, wherever you be. And I will always begin these sessions, these gatherings with this just entering in and being able to know that this is a safe space for you to be more still, just to become a noticer, observing yourself, what's moving through you. Maybe you came here, maybe it was a really rough day. So just allowing yourself to be here now and the thoughts you're having about the day or what you need to do tomorrow, just set those aside. You can come back to those. We are going to be a half an hour, just quick. So last week, we explored the adaptations that we learn to wear in order to belong, to stay safe, to avoid conflict, to gain approval. Does any of this sound familiar? Or to simply make it through difficult seasons of our lives. We talked about how those patterns were not mistakes. They're actually intelligent responses to the environments that we found ourselves in. And the invitation is not to judge them, but to actually become a noticer, to pay attention to what is arriving constantly and how you automatically maybe just do a normal thing you've always done, whether it's a reaction or shutting down, whatever your response has been, to just notice that and to begin asking what those patterns may have been protecting. We didn't get into this too much last week. Tonight, though, this is week 2 in the series of Learning to Stay. And this week, we will be talking about what happens to the feelings that we never learned how to feel, or that we never allowed ourselves to feel because we didn't know how. So, I want to back up because we didn't really get into this last week, but what were those adaptations protecting us from feeling? Because that's what we're getting into this week. Underneath nearly every adaptation that lives in each one of us is an emotion that we never fully learned how to experience. Do you notice that I didn't say feel, to experience? I really believe that we came here to experience everything, everything on the spectrum of being human, all the feelings, all the emotions, heavy and light, whatever category we're putting them in. We're here to experience that because it's through our experience that we gain the wisdom. We can't have a relationship with grief or joy if we've never allowed ourselves to actually experience those emotions to their fullness. Does that make sense? When we are allowing ourselves to do that, it's a lived experience that we're meant to have in this body. So, the feelings beneath the adaptations, let's talk about this. Perhaps we learned that sadness made people feel uncomfortable. Perhaps anger wasn't welcome. I'm curious if you have anything to comment about this, maybe an experience you had, or if you're like, yes, I agree to all of this, please drop it in the chat. I'd love to know that you're here and that you have some sort of way to feel about this or just your own experience with this. Perhaps fear was seen as weakness. Anger wasn't welcome. Perhaps disappointment, loneliness, grief, jealousy, shame, or helplessness had nowhere to go, had nowhere to live. So we adapted. And I want to just say this quickly. I say it a lot, but if you're new here, this is really important piece of this. I was raised by the silent generation, but I'm older than probably some of you here. But the silent generation would have been the people who were very stoic. If they felt something for them, they never saw their parents or grandparents back, knowing how to deal with big emotions. So they'd either get angry or shut down. They had a different adaptation. And so when they were raising us, if you're my age-ish, then if they could not, they didn't have the capacity to tend to our emotions, big or small, whatever they were, because they didn't know how to do that for themselves. So there's so much grace. There's no blame. It's like, of course, my parents didn't know how to tend to my emotions. They were trying to figure it out for themselves. So that being said, we don't go to these, we're not talking about who we can blame. We're actually talking about what actually happened and how it felt, and how there's so much grace and compassion for everyone involved, including ourselves, because that was just how it was back then. Now, if you're younger and you're being raised by parents who are kind of in this threshold, I would say we're the sandwich generation. I am. I was raised by the silent generation. I am in the sandwich generation where I was tending to older parents while still having kids to tend to, young ones. And then the next generation that I was raising, I would call them the saturated generation, where there's just so much information available to them. They're a little bit emotionally saturated and overwhelmed with noise, the busyness of digital reality of their lives. So different than ours, the generations before. So we adapted. We learned to smile when we were actually hurting. I've done that. If you've done any of this, give me a thumbs up in the chat. We learned to stay busy when we were grieving. We learned to care for everyone else instead of tending to ourselves. We learned to explain away our pain, rise above it, spiritualize it, fix it, distract from it, or pretend it wasn't there. Not because we were doing something wrong, but because our nervous systems were trying to help us actually survive something that felt confusing and kind of impossible to navigate. So, the nervous system has one primary concern. It's safety and connection. Safety and connection. So when our nervous system feels unsafe or threatened in any way, can you see how it would do anything? If expressing a feeling threatens either of those things, our safety or our connection, we learn very quickly what to do with that feeling, or perhaps more accurately, what not to do with it. We can't feel that because my parents, they're just like, go to your room and cry. Or big boys don't cry. Even girls shouldn't cry. You shouldn't have that feeling. I don't know what to do with that. And I don't even think they had the language to say, I don't know what to do with that. They just probably did what their parents did for them. So whatever they were saying to you was probably learned from their modeled by their own parents. So the nervous system and unfinished feelings. Let's talk about this for a minute. So, if we had those feelings and we didn't know what to do with them, emotions don't just simply disappear because we ignore them. This is what we're talking about this week. A feeling that is fully experienced tends to move. Emotions are energy in motion. Emotion. Energy wants to move. It's always changing and flowing, right? The energy of life, life force energy, chi, whatever you want to call it, prana, it's called by in many different traditions a certain thing. Some people call it the spirit or source, how it moves through us. It wants to express itself so it can complete, and we have the experience of that. But when we're doing something different, it can't express fully. A feeling that is resisted often persists. Have you noticed this? Not because we're being punished by life or our ourselves, our emotions, but because the nervous system keeps bringing unfinished material, emotions, back into our experience. So our awareness, so we can finally experience it. Does this make sense? When I first started to study these concepts and be more in relationship with my own emotions, finally, I was like, oh my gosh, this would bring so much freedom to so many people when they understood that the very thing that they're resisting will persist until it can complete. That's just how it works. That's the law of this universe. Energy cannot be destroyed. It must go somewhere. So it is still trying to complete something. Children, if you have children or have ever had children or been around children, you know that they know how to do this innately, naturally. A child cries fully and expresses all of their emotions from anger and frustration and sadness and sorrow and grief to joy and happiness and excitement and all of it. They're all over. And can you see if you've ever watched a child, the emotion moves through. So, somewhere along the way, many of us learn to interrupt that process. We learn to hold it together and to be strong or to move on or to not make anyone else uncomfortable. And over time, we become disconnected not only from our difficult emotions, but from feeling itself. So I want to share a story here really quickly about a realization that I had that changed my life. And it was a few years back. For most of my life, I thought I was protecting myself from pain. I don't know if this will resonate with you, but I realize as I sit with my own clients, this is not just a personal story, it's very collective as well. So maybe this will resonate with you. I thought if I could avoid fear, grief, disappointment, rejection, or heartbreak, I would somehow be safer. What I didn't realize was that the walls, literally, it's like an energetic heart wall that I didn't even know I put there. But it was there because when I had this experience, I was being shown, oh, I have a wall there. I didn't realize that the walls I had built unwittingly were not selective. So the walls that kept sorrow away from me, far away from me, also kept joy far away. The walls that kept heartbreak out also kept wonder out. The walls that kept rejection out also kept intimacy out. The walls that kept pain out also kept aliveness out. So years ago, when I had this experience, I felt something that I couldn't readily identify. And it makes me a little emotional to speak about because it was such a simple thing that happened. And in the moment, I didn't know how to identify it. But when I finally did, it felt expansive, open, and alive. And I sat with it. And that's when I realized what I was feeling. It was joy, not happiness or excitement. It was joy. It was deeper than an experience that was being felt because something was happening. It was a realization that the joy was coming up, flowing through me because I had allowed things to kind of clear out. It was a very beautiful experience that I will never forget. But I remember thinking in that moment, what is this? It felt unfamiliar because I'd spent so much of my life unknowingly keeping feeling itself at a distance. And it's interesting because as I spoke with a friend about this, actually, she was there at the time. She shared that she was afraid of joy. And at first, I didn't understand, but now I do, because joy asks us to become vulnerable, to receive, to soften, to allow life in, to get past our walls. We often think we're protecting ourselves from pain, but many of us are also protecting ourselves from joy. And that's the paradox of feeling. What I've come to understand is that we cannot selectively numb our experiences. When we shut down one part of our emotional life, we absolutely are diminishing access to the whole spectrum of our experiences with the extensions of us that are our emotions. Our emotions are not separate from us. They are an extension of us energetically, trying to get our attention. I'm feeling lonely. I want to grieve. I am angry. What is our loneliness and our anger and our grief trying to speak to us? It's trying to teach us, have this experience so it can move through you and complete. And because you're allowing it to complete, you are more complete because now you've allowed the experience and you're like, I've been willing to go to the depths of my sorrow and not even knowing that that actually creates a space for the expansive feeling of its opposite, joy, abundance, peace, all of that we seek. If we're not willing to feel it's like a battery, it's the polarity. The negative and the positive have to be experienced to come together as one, as whole. So the goal is not to feel less. The goal is to become safe enough here, right here, safe enough to feel more. A person who has never allowed fear may never discover the depth of their own courage. Can you see how that works? A person who has never allowed grief may never fully experience gratitude. A person who has never allowed vulnerability may never know true intimacy. And when I'm saying this, I want you to understand that when I'm saying a person who has never allowed vulnerability, where? Where? If you are not able to be vulnerable with yourself, do you really think that you are capable of doing that with other? So when I'm speaking about this, I'm saying if you're a person who's never allowed yourself to be vulnerable with yourself, or to allow grief to move through you fully, or to allow fear to like sit with fear and then still do the thing, then you understand your courage. Then you understand your gratitude and your intimacy, your the capacity for intimacy with self. Then you have capacity for intimacy with other. To go on this list still, a person who has never allowed sorrow may not realize how much joy is waiting on the other side of that openness. To be open to feel sorrow, it allows you to be open to more fullness of joy. And it's not because suffering is good. That's not what I'm saying here. It's because being open to all of our experiences, to live life fully, it expands our capacity to receive, be a receiver of all of life that it wants to bring to us. So, the spiritual perspective of this is every thought carries energy. I'm getting into quantum physics, which is a way to explain spirituality on some levels, that our thoughts have energy and our emotions have energy. I've said this before, I'll say it again, that death, if everything has a frequency, the frequency of death is zero. When we're measuring hertz for the frequency of something and it has a sound, it has a feeling, it's a wave. And when death is zero, right above death is the frequency of the emotion of shame. And it resonates just above death at 20 hertz. And then guilt and resentment and remorse and anger, all of those go up from there. But shame is the basement of our emotions that feel so heavy, we will do anything to avoid it. Because shame is different than guilt. Shame says or feels like, not that I did something bad, but that I am bad because I did that thing. Can you see how that's different? Guilt is, I'm still a good person, but I made a mistake. Shame says, I'm bad because I did that. There's a difference there. And if you are living in the frequency of shame, that is a hefty thing to carry. And to be able to turn towards shame with compassion and be the one who stays with that feeling of shame, everything can start to feel lighter. Everything can start to change and move and start to finally complete. So when an experience is fully felt, finally, it tends to move through us. When it isn't, we often carry it forward in our bodies, in our relationships, our reactions, our expectations, and the stories that we tell ourselves about who we be. That all lives in a frequency. And if we're not aware of it, it's controlling us on some way. We're not free. So bringing awareness to these, can you see how bringing awareness changes everything? We can't change what we can't see. So if we're not aware that those patterns are living in us, making us react in a certain way because we believe we should be ashamed to be here or ashamed to feel because that's what we learned when we were younger. So what remains unprocessed, it doesn't disappear. It simply changes form. And perhaps healing isn't so much about fixing the parts of us that we don't want to feel, like the emotions that feel heavy. We don't need to fix them. It's actually about becoming willing to stay present with what has been waiting for maybe our whole lives so far for our attention. So we're not here to get rid of it or to judge it or to make it feel wrong or ashamed. That's why we kind of went like a turtle under our shell to protect ourselves, but to finally meet it with the compassion it may have needed all along. It only ever wanted to be seen and understood. Our sacred needs are to be seen, heard, and understood. Why would our emotions, which are an extension of us, be any different? When they can finally feel understood or seen, where they're finally met and they can finally complete, and then they're not living on us anymore, calling to us over and over. Can you see how the freedom comes when we finally do the thing that we've been kind of avoiding and scared of? We realize, wait, this is a gift I get to give myself. This isn't something I have to do. I get to do this for me. That's a beautiful, that's a different, that's a like a mindset shift. So, to kind of wrap this up tonight, I want to ask a few questions here. This is just a group reflection for everyone who's here and if you're watching this later. And just think about this. Just become a noticer. Notice what happens when I ask some of these questions. What feelings were welcome in your family growing up? So as a little kid, what feelings were actually welcome in your family? Maybe that's a question you've never asked, but it's something to be curious about because it will help you identify the things that needed to be protected for you. So every person may have a different answer probably to this question. Even the same children within the same family will have probably a different answer based on their lived experience growing up in that family. And it's different, that all the dynamics of family, it's so fascinating, human behavior and how oldest children will behave differently than middle children or final children, and the dynamics of parents and all the different archetypes that we move through it within our family systems. So the next question is, which feelings were not welcome? And maybe your mind already went there. Oh, I know what was not allowed to express in my family. What did you learn to do when something hurt? When you felt hurt, not just physically, but maybe emotionally? What feeling have you spent most of your life trying not to feel? That's a beautiful question. Not the story, not who caused it, not why, just the feeling itself. And what might become possible if you no longer had to run from that feeling, to avoid it, to distract yourself, to numb out, to do anything but feel that feeling. So just sit with these questions. Let them just be there. Notice if there's resistance. There could be, because this is the stuff that we have learned to avoid without even knowing that we learned it. So there's no blame, there's no shame here. There is just compassion and curiosity and trust. Trust your timing. Everyone's going to have their timing of when they become more aware of it and when it's their season to actually turn toward it. But it certainly helps. If you're here listening to this, this is an act of self-care. So thank you for being here. In closing, I just want to say that learning to stay is not only learning to stay present with other people, it is learning to stay present with ourselves first, especially when something uncomfortable comes up. Perhaps in learning to stay with what we once feared, we're able to actually discover that what has been waiting beneath the fear all along isn't more suffering, but a greater, expanded capacity for love, for joy, peace, connection, and aliveness. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being able to tap into that? I guess maybe that's why I'm here. I'm so passionate about all of this and sharing it freely with whomever will receive it. That freedom really is deeper levels of healing. Healing ourselves through being present and being the one who stays with all of the emotions so they can finally say, ah, thank you. I've been sitting there just waiting patiently to finish, to finish some unfinished business. So last week's invitation was to become a noticer. And this week's invitation is to do the same thing. Last week it was just notice maybe what your automatic reactions are. That's what last week's invitation was. To just notice, oh, I can see how I react quickly, or how angry I get, or how defensive I get, because I'm living in the frequency of my ego, which is fear instead of love. When we step outside of our ego and we can notice, oh my gosh, I'm so defensive. Oh, I get so resistant to when they say that. Good. That's good. Notice that. Because being triggered by something, anything, don't shoot the messenger. Notice, oh, I'm triggered right now. Good. That's giving me access to a part of me I've been avoiding, or it wouldn't keep coming through all different signals, whether it's in a relationship or an experience or something at work or whatever it is. So this week, become a noticer of what feelings arise throughout your day. Notice which feelings are easy to welcome and which ones you immediately are trying to fix, avoid, explain, distract from, or push away. And when you notice one, pause. Maybe put your hand on your heart here, in your heart space, and ask gently, what might this feeling be trying to show me? What might this feeling, anger, loneliness, resentment, jealousy, shame, fear, what might this feeling be trying to show me? And what would it be like to stay with it for just one more breath? And that's it. That's how simple it gets to be. It's not complicated. It's actually embarrassingly simple. And we weren't taught how to do it. So there's no shame in that. There's just so much grace. So become a noticer this week of what feelings you're like, oh, this is great. I welcome that. And then what category I'm putting in the things that are a little bit heavier. And what would it be like? I love this last kind of invitation. What would it be like to stay with it for just one more breath? Because when you're willing to do that, that willingness brings an energy that is more open. It's more, so now your emotions may come and they'll knock on the door, And they're like, are you willing? I feel there's like a willingness to maybe open the door, or if it's like one of those Dutch doors, just half the door, so you can peek out and be like, what's going on out here, right? Or in here. So thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for showing up. If you're watching this later, I appreciate you finding this space, and I hope you will continue this journey with us, the June series of learning how to stay. And right now, I don't have readily available what next week is, but I will send out reminders again and show up, because it's like this thread, this beautiful thread that's taking us through how we've been, what we saw modeled, what worked, what didn't work, how we can um, not work, but actually invite these experiences to move through us in a different way, because we're here to experience it all. So why not become more free in the experiencing of it and be more, have a more full life, have more abundance readily available to us, because we're not avoiding and running from, spending so much energy running from ourselves, essentially. Okay. Thank you again. And I hope to see you next week. And that's it. Ciao for now.